Hello and welcome to our webinar entitled After the Employee Survey. Thank you for attending. We look forward to having an informative discussion on employee engagement and the post-survey activities that can help your organization make transformational improvements. I am Bob Randall. I'm very passionate about employee engagement. I've got 25 years of experience in the corporate world and also did my doctorate in organization development at the University of St. Thomas. And I've been studying and living in this world of engagement for a long time. So let's get things started. Some housekeeping notes. We have a chat box. If you have connection issues, this is being recorded and is available to people after the recording is complete. So feel free to share this with others. Essentially what we're going to talk about today are what surveys can tell you, why you might want to conduct a survey, what not to do, best practices, and also best practices for what to do, how to improve engagement, and how you might want to even consider jumping into some solutions to make things better for your organization. So we have about a 20-minute webinar to go through these topics, and I hope that you find them all very interesting. So how do surveys work? So a lot of companies, I think it's around 70% from most of the studies I've come across, do an employee engagement assessment. Most of them are doing surveys. And essentially what they're trying to do is measure the employee commitment to their job and the organization. And they measure that commitment at the cognitive, the emotional, and the behavioral level. So on the cognitive level, it's how do employees think about the organization. On the emotional level, it's how do they feel about the organization. And then the behavioral level, it's how do those feelings play out for them? How do they spend their discretionary time on behalf of the organization? So essentially what we try to do is to measure the level of employees' commitments to their job and the organization. Usually those questions take the form of a Likert scale. So the employees asked somewhere typically between 20 and 50 questions around how they feel about their job, their coworkers, their boss, the organization's mission, those types of things on a Likert scale. And from there, we can go ahead and benchmark and look at trends. And some organizations do their engagement surveys annually, some do them a couple times a year, and some do them every other year. But they're able to see how they're making improvements, or maybe they're reverting in some areas. So essentially, the data I'm showing here on the pie chart shows you that this is Gallup data that's been gathered from across the US. And unfortunately, these numbers haven't changed much over the last 20 years, but only about 30% of the employees in the US are fully engaged, whereas 52% are not engaged. Those are kind of the sleepwalkers at work. They're there for the paycheck typically, and that's about it. And then 18% are actively disengaged. Those employees are upset about something. So anyway, that's kind of how surveys work. Companies will conduct a survey, they'll get their results, and then try to figure out what to do from there. So as we look at how the survey data gets reflected back to employees and to the leadership group, we can look at different aspects of engagement. So you might take some of the questions and relate them back to the leadership and the confidence in leadership. You can see in this particular case, it's a fictitious company, Bob's Candy Company. You can see over the last couple of years, the company has slipped when it comes to confidence and leadership. However, they're a little bit flat when it comes to an employee's development opportunities. So they're kind of holding their own there. And then they've made some improvements when it comes to employee appreciation. So again, just kind of an example of how a company might take that data and to stratify it across the organization to try to dig into what some of the more specific issues are, where they're doing well and where they could do better. So why did the organization conduct a survey in the first place? As I mentioned, most organizations do some kind of survey, up to 70%. Typical reasons organizations will do a survey. Sometimes it's just management wants to kind of get a pulse on the workforce. And that's kind of the curiosity piece of it. What do employees think? In some cases, it can be a corporate requirement. The board of directors might make measuring engagement a regular reporting requirement. Or it could be, if you're working in a government agency, something that the head of the agency makes the different departments do. And then some organizations say, hey, we're going to do this every year, every other year, as I mentioned earlier. And in that particular case, they're really trying to monitor the trends. They're trying to see, are we doing better? Are we getting worse? So they're looking for year-over-year data to see, where the employee commitments might be shifting. And then many organizations, and this is where I think you can see the most benefit from doing a survey, is where it really becomes an instrument for workplace improvement. The measurement is part of a larger strategy for improvement. The organization might say, hey, we want to be one of the best places to work. We want to attract the best talent. We want to lower our retention or our turnover rate and improve retention of our employees. And we know when we do those things that we're going to get better results. We're going to have more loyal customers. We're going to have better quality, and we're going to have better innovation inside of our company. So it becomes part of the bigger picture and one of the main strategies of the organization. And that's where I think you can see companies and organizations really making strides when it becomes part of their everyday environment. So there is a danger zone here that we have to talk a little bit about. So just doing a survey alone actually can have a negative consequence, because if you only do the survey and you're not going to do anything with the results, you're actually raising expectations from the employees that something's going to happen. They're being asked to have their voice heard, and then if nothing happens with those concerns that they might raise, there's actually a letdown. So that's really, really important to know. So I typically caution my clients that I'm working with and organizations that I talk to against doing a survey or against doing an assessment unless they're fully committed to doing something with the results. So it really needs to become part of their strategy to be something that's important. So one thing you might consider is, where are you on the engagement journey? Where is your organization? An employee engagement level typically doesn't really change much if you're only doing the measurement. The measurement is kind of the lowest amount of engagement activity that an organization might engage in. If they're going to take the data, if the organization's going to take the data and target hotspots, however, there's a little bit of improvement activity that will occur, and you might see the engagement level improve slightly. And targeting a hotspot essentially means, where are the biggest deficits that we have? Is it confidence in leadership, as I referred to earlier? Is it employees not feeling appreciated? Maybe we put an appreciation program in place. You might see your data tick up year over year when you start to target hotspots. But there's also a way organizations can take that information and turn it into a more integrated strategy. And this is kind of where, if you remember, maybe your organization 20, 30 years ago had a problem with quality. I know I've been part of manufacturing organizations where quality was kind of an issue, and it really didn't start to change until management made it one of the top priorities of the organization. It was something that was talked about across the organization every single day, and it became one of the top priorities. And the same thing needs to happen with engagement in order for it to have sustainable, meaningful improvements in any organization. But the neat thing is that once you get there, once it becomes part of the culture kind of roots out the disengaged employees at that point. So you hit this tipping point of having an engaged culture. Once you have, people on board, they're excited to be there, and you start to get a bad apple in the group, and the employee groups almost kind of root out those negative attitudes at that point. So that's something kind of neat to think through. But it takes quite an effort to get there, and it takes time as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. So the first thing organizations do is they'll do the survey, and then they start to review the data. And the survey provider, if you're going to hire somebody to do your survey for you, typically will publish the data and review it with you. And this is important because how you want that information to be disseminated and how you want that information to be showed to the employees is really important to get that right up front. So that's an important thing to consider. And then secondly, the quantitative results are important, but there are also typically qualitative results that come through as well. So those things are the employee comments that come through in the survey. So as I kind of use an example here on the right, we have the qualitative or the quantitative data in the pie graph, where employees choose a number, they agree, they don't agree, they somewhat agree. But then they also are given the opportunity to leave comments. I learn a lot from my coworkers. I wish I knew more of my coworkers better. That type of thing can be valuable data to review as well. And I typically recommend that you look for themes. So a one-off comment doesn't mean you need to totally shift your strategy in the company for a one-off comment. But if you start to see themes come up in the comments that are repeated over and over again, then that's something that you might want to address. And then as you think through about how you're going to communicate those results, think through don't overwhelm your employees when you're going to share the data with all kinds of graphs and charts. Give them the high-level themes that came out, show them some of the quantitative data that came out of the survey, but distill it down. If it's the management group, maybe they want to dig in a little bit deeper. If it's an all-employee meeting, don't bore them for an hour-long meeting with all kinds of employee data. And then talk through who's the team that should be involved in reviewing the raw data to kind of help you develop the themes that come out of that. That should be determined up front. All important things. So we put together a communication plan outline. So when you get to the point of sharing the data with employees, and I would say in just about every single case, it's important to share those results so you can have a degree of transparency with your employees and that they know that their voices were heard. And in some cases, employees might be surprised that their voice might differ from some of their coworkers. And it's important for them to know that. I've been involved in many engagement surveys where you might have 2 or 3 different factions of employees, and they all think that everybody thinks the way they do, but they might be surprised to know that there's not necessarily a consensus around the way they exactly think. But when it comes to the communication plan, the first thing you want to do is make sure you thank the employees, appreciate them for their input. Unfortunately, a lot of leaders and companies forget to do this. And it's important to let them know that you appreciate the fact that they filled the data out and that it's valued. And then talk about why their input is important. What's the purpose of the survey? How does it fit into the bigger picture and the company's overall priorities? That type of thing is important for the employees to understand, that it's not just a one-off event. And then go ahead and obviously share the survey results. As I mentioned earlier, for an all-employee meeting, you might want to consider distilling it down to, rather than showing them 30 or 40 slides, maybe consider distilling it down to 5 or 10 slides, for example. And then have a storyline. Don't just show them numbers and have them try to figure out how to interpret it. Talk to them about how you interpret what you heard in the survey. That's really important as well. And then set the expectations going forward. Now what's going to be done? What's after the survey? And that's what we're going to talk more about in this webinar. But as far as talking to the employees, give them a set of expectations. When will they hear next from you when it comes to some of the actions that might be considered that are outcomes from the survey? So post-survey, kind of the targeting hotspots, I mentioned that earlier. One way that you can do this is with a root cause analysis. This is something that comes out of Lean Six Sigma training. And essentially what we do is when there's an issue, and targeting a hotspot means that you have a low point or an obvious area for improvement that came out of your survey. And we typically would say, well, let's use the 5 whys example. So you might, one of the results of your survey might be that employees feel underappreciated. So then you ask, well, why do they feel underappreciated? And you might dig into the data deeper. Maybe some of the comments were, well, the manager is failing to recognize the employees. Well, why is that occurring? Well, maybe the manager feels too busy to take time to recognize the employees. So again, maybe you go and ask the managers and you do a little bit more assessment. You start digging in a little bit deeper. Okay, well, they feel too busy because there are other things that are more important in their mind. So how do you make engagement more important? Or maybe they have a lack of a personal time management system. So they're unable to prioritize and they feel like they're firefighting all day. So maybe they need a little bit of training, or they need to have a system to make it easy for them to recognize employees so that, that actually occurs. That's how you kind of get to a root cause, and you come up with solutions that are actually going to manifest themselves in improvements. Okay, so what does a successful employee engagement effort look like? This was taken from the latest ISO employee engagement standard. It's currently being worked on, and a lot of work's been done over the last couple of years on this. But essentially, the main themes are that employee engagement really needs to be an ongoing process. Again, it's not a one-time event. It's not a once-a-year event. It's not a once-a-quarter event. It's something just like I'm kind of compared it to making quality number one. Making employee engagement one of your top priorities needs to take place as well if you actually want to improve it. So it becomes an everyday effort, and it involves everybody. So we take the principles, it starts with leadership, and we start to invoke that and involve it in the everyday operations of the organization. So it's not just an HR function, it becomes important for all of managers, and it's something that is maybe not measured, but it's talked about and it's worked on every single day. So at the organization level, we also will sometimes use traditional organization development management systems to help make improvements. So when we use an action research approach, the organization might think about how does the survey fit into an ongoing improvement effort. Well, when we are making any change in an organization, and improving engagement certainly is a change-oriented effort, the first thing we do is we diagnose. And that's the survey, typically. So we diagnose with the survey, then we start to disseminate what did we learn out of that diagnosis, and we start planning for the changes. And then we start implementing the changes. And again, this might take a couple of months, and it will probably take a team of people to help make this happen. And then we evaluate, how did we do? How did this new appreciation program go over with employees? And maybe we do a pulse survey to find out, and we look at the activity level that's taking place on it. And then, of course, we want to do the full diagnosis again, possibly 12 months later, to see if, from the employee's point of view, did we really make any improvements? So there are different ways to get that diagnosis and the assessment done, but this is a traditional change management model that comes out of the organization development world that I think applies very nicely to employee engagement. So one other thing I would recommend is not being afraid to jump into solutions. Employees really appreciate action, especially if you've been doing surveys for years, you haven't seen many improvements. Don't be afraid to jump into some improvements. These are really these are the top 5 drivers of engagement. This comes out of research that I have done, based on research that others have done. But But typically, people will tell you that one or all five of these areas of engagement pop up in survey data. Confidence and leadership in the organization strategy is a very common one that gets measured. And if you happen to have a lack or a gap in this area, here are some suggestions on the right that you might consider. Maybe having some town hall meetings. Maybe you're doing town hall meetings and you need to do more. Celebrating milestones. Oftentimes we kind of focus on negatives in organizations. How do we celebrate some successes? That really gets employees more engaged with the strategy of the organization as you're trying to develop new products perhaps, or go to new markets. Whatever those strategies are that you're trying to put in place, put some milestones in place and then celebrate them when you hit them. The employees will just feel like they're part of a positive momentum. A communication portal is something to help employees engage with each other. It helps create social engagement between the company and the employee. There's some very good ones out there. This goes well above and beyond a traditional intranet site or a SharePoint site. Those are good for file sharing, but a communication portal is much more dynamic. And there are a lot of very good ones out there. And then the performance management system also can come into play to make sure that employees are tied into this organization strategy, and making sure you have one where it's fostering regular communication between the employee and the manager is really important. The next thing on company communication, oftentimes I hear employees say the communication here could be better. I mentioned a couple of these already with the portal, the town hall meetings. We also would recommend a weekly team huddle up. So just making sure that the employee and their teams are getting together on a regular basis. Employee focus groups. That can be another way to just get a better idea from the employees on what type of communication they'd like to see from the organization. The relationship with supervisor, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, I didn't quit my job, I quit my boss. But having a really good relationship with one supervisor is very important. And having a leadership development program so that those leaders who are in place have a very good idea and a strategy for how they're going to develop those relationships with their employees is very important. I mentioned the performance management system before, and that's just a way to foster regular employee communication between their boss and the employee, and then having regular check-in meetings and then team building events. Again, all meant to kind of foster healthy work relationships. Employee appreciation, again, a very common driver of engagement. There's some really neat appreciation programs out there. Whether it's a points-based program for appreciation that can be peer-to-peer or manager to employee to reward employees for doing great work. Safety award programs, there have been some changes with OSHA, but there's some really cool creative safety award programs that can be put in place. So employees feel appreciated for doing the right thing when it comes to safety. And then service award programs. So maybe not, so having a traditional program in place is very important. You know, the 5, 10, 15, 20 year, but we're seeing more organizations start rewarding employees at the 6-month or the 1 year anniversary level to start touching employees a lot sooner in their career with the company. And then performance incentives. So again, putting an incentive program in place for employees to feel like, hey, I reached some goals here for the company and now I feel like I'm being appreciated. And then employee development opportunities, those are oftentimes fostered through the performance management system, employee training, cross-training that can occur, again, having kind of like a competency grid methodology to that. There's some really neat things that can be done there. Some kind of team development helps with all of those employee development opportunities. Employees want to feel oftentimes like there's a future for them at their company and they're going to continue to learn and grow. And having those programs in place is really important. So again, those are some of the solutions you might consider moving ahead on. And oftentimes I see, unfortunately, organizations get a little bit of analysis paralysis when it comes to implementing solutions. I kind of recommend, you have enough data probably. Let's focus on something and get something done over the next 3 months, for example. Let's get something in place. Employees want to see action. That's very important. So with that, that kind of wraps up what to do after the survey. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Questions can be directed to our website at transcendengagement.com. And we're always happy to talk to our clients about what they might do to make improvements. So thank you for your time today. And with that, we will sign off and hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Did you hit the green button and end it?
Yeah, I did the stop sharing. Is that what you mean?